Whoa, wavy. Hey everybody, this is Craig from Novel Games. Today is a Sega Saturn based video, but the videos that I said are coming. I'm editing them. I'm actually putting effort into those. This video I'm gonna do because I think this person wants a shout out. So hi Tyler Jones, how are you? In my last video, this is a problem with younger gamers out there. You don't understand the power that a retro console has for older people. And he made a couple of good valid points in the things he was saying back to me, and it actually wasn't disrespectful or whatever. I wasn't disrespectful back to him, just arguing points. And he said something that is pretty common information that's wrong, and I wanted to fix that. So this is a story of the Sega Saturn from my perspective when I was a kid, and then what actually happened. I figure out what happened as an adult, and it makes a lot of sense. When I was a kid, I used to have a best friend who lived behind me. His name was Fabian, and he would get the opposite console that I asked for, right? So that way, instead of exchanging games, we could exchange consoles when we were down with games. So he got a Sega Saturn. He didn't ask for a Sega Saturn. His dad came home with a Sega Saturn one day and just gave it to him. And he didn't have a PlayStation, so I asked for a PlayStation. So whenever he beat a couple of Sega Saturn games, I beat a couple of PlayStation games, we'd swap consoles. And that's how I got my Sega Saturn experience when I was younger. Problem was, I wanted my own Sega Saturn, and on weekends, I was doing work for my father, so I was making money because my dad owned a general contracting business. So I basically had to go and dig holes or jump into septic tanks. Not used ones, ones that were being installed and fitted for new housing developments. Stuff like that. Stuff little hands and little bodies could do. Child labor. Anyways, so I had the money, and I remember this distinctly. I actually, this was around the summer. I made $700 working for my dad for the entire summer, which was huge when you're a kid, right? I wanted to buy a Sega Saturn. I couldn't fucking find a Sega Saturn anywhere. I used to think it was like the greatest selling console because there was PlayStation everywhere, and then a couple of years later, Nintendo 64 was everywhere. No Sega Saturn shit anywhere. And I was just like, all right, well, it's either really good or it's not doing that well. And my experience was the person behind me had a Sega Saturn, and he was getting all these hot games that were coming out. And as I got older, I realized it happened because when Sega Saturn was at the E3, that they were terrified of Sony, they did a surprise launch. They did a surprise launch out of fear, and what they did is they said, it's releasing immediately. It's available right now to buy. They didn't send it to all the retailers. KB Toys was one of them. And KB Toys, when I was younger, was fucking huge. And if KB Toys didn't want you, you were fucked. Because KB Toys was at every single mall in America. I believe Walmart was on that train too. Some of the retailers who didn't get their stock and the anticipated release date was later, they weren't supposed to have it yet, so some people had it early. The people who didn't get it boycotted Sega because they were like, oh, well, now we're losing money because you did this. So KB Toys said they refused to carry anything Sega Saturn, and they went pro PlayStation. That helped destroy the sales of Sega Saturn in America, because when they came back around and things were, fully fleshed out, KB Toys was like, go fuck yourself. And then it was funny because later on, KB Toys started going down. They carried the Dreamcast, and then KB Toys was out of business, like, completely. So, because I used to go to KB Toys to get my games, because I used to go to the mall, and my KB Toys had a massive fucking video game section. I went to that place all the way up until I had my GameCube, because we didn't have a GameStop. There was no GameStops back then. We had EB Games, Software, etc. And those two combined, Software, etc. became GameStop, and then they absorbed EB Games and FuncoLand and on all those fucking places. So why did Sega do this? Well, Sega did this because the PlayStation was supposed to be an add-on for the Super Nintendo. I believe we all know this, right? It was supposed to be the Nintendo's PlayStation. It was a disc add-on to the Super Nintendo. It was supposed to be a bridge between their Ultra 64 and the Super Nintendo and the Ultra 64. This was going to be like the stopgap of the 32-bit era for Nintendo. Nintendo said no, right? Nintendo didn't want to do that. They ended up siding with Philips, and that failed. I believe it was Philips. They sided with Philips, and Sony went and shopped it to Sega and said, we have this prototype we're working on. It was for Nintendo. We can do it by ourselves, or we can do it with you. And the CEO of Sega of Japan at the time was like, basically, like, you're not proven. We don't need your help. Like, we do just fine. We don't need help from an unknown video game entity. That fucking backfired on him. Clearly bad. Even if you just set aside the shit that happened with the Saturn era, just judging by the Dreamcast, and obviously it's fucking Nintendo's doing its own thing now, but now it's Sony and Microsoft, and Sega's gone, right? The other problem with Sega Saturn is that they made their console. Their console was really under the hood. Like, look it up. Under the hood, it was a fantastic console. Technologically, from a technological standpoint, it was an amazing console. The problem was their technology that they used and the way that they built the inside of the console and how the things work in conjunction with each other made it difficult for third-party developers, and they didn't want to deal with it. And it doesn't help that you made a console that's difficult to program for, and you didn't even tell your third-party people that you were doing an early release. So all these games that were supposed to release on the Sega Saturn from third-party, they thought they had more time to develop, and they didn't. And some of those games ended up coming out later, or some of those games ended up being rushed, or some of those games just got scrapped entirely, and third parties were like, no, we're good. Like, we don't want to make games for your consoles anymore. So the biggest enemy of the 32-bit era and extending into the Nintendo 64, the 64-bit era, they were the only ones. It wasn't the fault of Sony and Nintendo crushing them. It was the fault of Sega being dumbasses and owning themselves. And the thing that inspired me to make this video is that he said, I heard the Sega Saturn didn't do well in Japan either. Sega Saturn was Sega's most successful console in Japan. And the reason that it wasn't so great over here, and the reason why a lot of people modify or import Sega Saturns or get something that unlocks the region, is because we only got a fraction of their library. There's an amazing amount of games out on the Sega Saturn that came out only in Japan, and you can only play them on a Sega Saturn. They didn't come multi-platform. We just didn't get them. The reason that it's so great over there is because we didn't get them. And the reason that I said I enjoyed the Sega Saturn so much, especially when I was younger, is that nothing at that time could have compared to, like, me and my friend Fabian pulling an all-nighter on a weekend, staying up and playing Virtual Cop 2, Virtual Cop 1, and House of the Dead, regardless how you think that point was, instead of having to have our parents drop us off at the mall or ride our bikes down the arcade and drop a bunch of quarters into it. We got to stay in the comfort of our own home and play almost, not quite, perfect arcade ports. Some of the games were perfect arcade ports, and that's what made the Dreamcast so fun to everybody, is that more power, arcades were dying, so we got damn near perfect arcade ports for the Dreamcast. That's what the appeal of the Dreamcast was. Well, that was the appeal of the Saturn too in America. One of my favorite games in arcades when I was a kid was X-Men Children of the Atom. PlayStation didn't get that. Nintendo 64 didn't get that. Sega Saturn got that. There was this lobster place that we used to go to, like, whenever I got a good report card or whenever my dad was just feeling it. And in their lobby, they had X-Men Children of the Atom. And I want to say they had Eternal Champions. X-Men ate so much of my money. And when I figured out I could have it at home and it worked perfectly, it was a wrap. Like, Sega Saturn became one of my favorite consoles. And then some of the Japanese imports, obviously there's better ways to play it now. I said it in my last video, like Radiant Silvergun was one of my favorite side-scrolling shoot-'em-ups. I have it on the Saturn. I'll play it on the Saturn. It's fun and decent that way. But I think mainly what I like the Saturn for now is the RPGs. The RPGs that I missed when I was a kid, or the RPGs that I enjoyed when I was a kid, which is the video I'm doing the edit for, and I said it was a better quality. It's not my face. It's just me doing a voiceover. You can't play them anywhere else. And the emulation is so fucking hard that it makes it difficult to even play it on PC. So there's worth in having a Saturn, more so than there is worth of having a Sega Genesis or a Super Nintendo or a Nintendo or a Game Boy or an N64. Well, N64 is kind of the same issue. Emulation is just not there for it. And the interest to emulate it is there, but it's fucking hard, like I said, because the hardware, that's what makes it so difficult to emulate for. So whereas, your Sega Genesis, your Super Nintendo, your NES, your TurboGrafx 16, your Game Boy Advances, even your N64, you can go on your PC, you can download an emulator, you can steal a ROM, because that's what you do. I don't want anybody pretending like they play backups. And you can play them mostly in perfect condition, except for the Nintendo 64. They have a hard time with that too on certain games. And you can't do that with the Sega Saturn. I've tried every version, every variation. Some games work, and then some games just shit out, and it's not worth it. So Sega Saturn is one of the consoles that's actually worth having. Out of all the classic consoles I have, Sega Saturn is most definitely my prized one. Dreamcast I held over it at the time because I didn't have good emulation on it, but I do now. So now I put the Sega Saturn above it. And having my Sega Saturn in perfect condition makes it one of my most expensive consoles that I own, for retro at least. Like, I own a fucking ColecoVision. And that shit, I know you can sell them for $150, but I bought it for $40. Like, that's my other prized one. It's worth way more than I bought it for. Sega Saturn is now worth way more than I bought it for. I rebought a Sega Saturn 10 years ago, and I spent $50 on it. It's worth a lot more than that now. But yeah, so my issue with it was, with the comment initially, is while, yes, I think I said in my last video, my son was looking at the games and he was like, ew, they're old. You know what I mean? And in playing Virtual Fighter 2 on the Sega Saturn is pointless because I have a polished, way better version of it on PS3. I said I platinumed it. Some games, there's no point if there's an upgraded version. That's the point that this kid was trying to make in the comments yesterday in my video, is that if there's an upgraded version, why would you play it? But the games that you said are not, whatever. He said, like, why would you go back and play Resident Evil 2? Or why would you go back and play Mortal Kombat 1 when you have Mortal Kombat 11? Or Final Fantasy 7 when you have the remake? Because they're different games. They're not the same. I get the point you were trying to make. Like, why would I go back on Saturn and play Virtual Fighter 2 when I have Virtual Fighter 2 re-released as a perfect arcade port on the PS3? Well, that one, you're absolutely correct. There's really no reason, unless you want to go back and really play it on the controller. It doesn't make a fucking difference. But even Knights, you can play a better version of Knights on Xbox 360, on the Xbox Live Arcade. So I have no reason to ever play Knights on the Saturn again. But I do have a reason to play Clockwork Knight 1 and 2, Bug 1 and 2, Mr. Bones, House of Illusion, Albert Odyssey, Legend of Oasis, Radiant Silvergun, Panzer Dragoon 2, Panzer Dragoon Saga. My favorite version of Earthworm Jim 2 is on the Saturn. Still to this day, I just played it the other day. Resident Evil 1, up until they started putting it on everything, the better version was on the Saturn. So there are reasons to play older games, especially games that brought arcade conversions to your home, because there's a younger generation that had no arcades. They didn't exist. They didn't exist, but I think 2003 was the last time, no, even before that, was the last time I went to like an arcade seriously, because everything else I had at home. Like, we were in the PlayStation 2 Xbox era, and just going to arcades was just like, as you just go for fun, not because like, oh, this is where I get to play some of the most banging games that we don't have at home. But my thing I said was virtual racing, and I don't even like racing games, but sitting in that AM2 machine and playing virtual racing, and then having a chance to have it at home and play it, like, that shit blew your mind back in the day. And that's an experience that a lot of younger gamers, not even my kids, will ever get to experience. Because now, even if you go to like Dave & Buster's and shit, No, like it's right across the street. If you go to like Dave and Buster's, we even have an arcade down the street called Nomads. They're not arcade games. Like they have a couple classic of like the Midway style, like I call them carnival games because that's what they feel like. The ones that just eat your money for tickets. But they don't have like real arcade machines. They have some Mario Kart, and they have like a Luigi's Mansion, and they have like the themed arcade machines that are more like rides or things that they could mimic in VR if VR was there. It's not the same as playing Marvel, like when Dreamcast had Marvel vs. Capcom 2. It was the first home console to have it. Playing Marvel vs. Capcom 2, waiting in line, losing quarters, losing to an older kid next to you. No, you come home, play it on your Dreamcast. Same with Soul Calibur. Come home, play it on your Dreamcast, beef up. Then go to the arcade, then school that older kid who beat the shit out of you originally and took your quarters. That's a facet of gaming that there's an entire generation is going to miss out on. And I talked to my kid about it, and he's not interested. He doesn't care. But when he's older, because now he does like going back playing certain games, when he's older, maybe he'll have appreciation of these awesome stories I'm telling you. But as now, like your kids, you don't want to listen. But anyways, I hope that cleared a little bit of things up. Sega Saturn videos are coming, and I gotta finish streaming Little Nightmares. I hope everybody has a great day. Thank you for watching.